Hello and welcome to this discussion about young people in MR. It's absolutely fantastic to be joined by Liz Norman today. Liz, thanks so much for coming here and giving us your time. Can you first of all tell us a little bit about yourself?
I run a recruitment company that specialises in recruiting market researchers, analysts, insight people at all levels. I've been doing that for 25 years. Before that, I was a market researcher, and I'm very passionate about the industry and actually getting more people into it.
Awesome. So obviously that makes you perfectly qualified, I would say, to kind of give us your thoughts on this topic. So we've had a little chat before this hangout, and you told us about how, obviously, as you said, you're a recruiter, and you've noticed the kind of lack of young blood in the industry. So starting off more generally, can you tell us a little bit about kind of what trends you've seen there?
Well, certainly one of the key trends is that a lot of people don't know about market research. I mean, that's a problem generally amongst the general public. They really genuinely don't understand what market researchers do, the skills involved. They imagine that perhaps we go out and ask a few people on street corners a couple of questions. They might have heard of a political poll, but beyond that they know very little about it, and so they don't choose to go into it as a career. And almost everybody that ends up in market research does go by mistake. They often think they're doing something slightly different, and when they join, they find that they're working for a market research firm. So that means they're not necessarily encouraging people who have the right skills to go into the industry.
It seems to me that when we spoke a few weeks ago, you also mentioned that it was a retention issue as well, not just a kind of entry-level issue here with young people in market research. So can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, we certainly have a retention problem at mid-level. Almost all research agencies struggle to find and retain RM to AD level people, and there's a number of reasons for that. We haven't explored it completely. It could be something to do with the fact that people aren't necessarily choosing to go into the industry in the first place. In fact, they always thought they wanted to do something slightly different, so not surprisingly they leave. It's partly, I'm sure, to do because the skills that are learnt are very attractive to other industries. And a lot of people move into areas like marketing and advertising. It may be something to do with salary. And we think probably the industry doesn't live up to some of the experiences people get initially. So, for example, a lot of researchers end up doing a lot of work on very large ongoing projects and don't get the strategic involvement that they were hoping for.
So how would you say then, Liz, if it's obviously a retention problem, what, as a market research professional, what would you say to young people? What kind of aspects of the industry would you really plug and advertise in terms of that you think would be attractive for young graduates?
One of the first things I would say is that a lot of jobs, not just market research, are not nearly as exciting when you're first training. But you can go on to do things, and I think it's a real shame that we don't show market researchers the potential, the long-term potential for them with their skills. Those are many and varied, but just to give you two examples, there are something like 600 research agencies in this country. So the opportunity to set up a research agency and run your own company is really out there. It's easy to do. Lots of people have done it. Another example would be technology. Technology is changing the industry really rapidly, and therefore the opportunities within it. And again, we're not really demonstrating that to people. So I, I think a big issue is that a lot of people are focused on one particular area of research as a trainee. They can't see the industry, the big picture, the opportunities within it, and that's why they leave.
Mm. And what other ways would you keep them in the industry? Like I heard another professional talking about sort of mentoring schemes and that sort of thing. Would you suggest that as a good idea of sort of helping young researchers along more?
I think mentoring has two things. First of all, absolutely, it shows people how they can get to a particular role. So if you were mentored, for example, by somebody with big data experience, then you are learning about a different data source in addition to market research, and eventually that enables you to be better at general insight. So yes, it can help you learn skills, but also there's a lot of I think a lot of researchers are disappointed because they're not getting the recognition that they might do in other industries. That comes because of two reasons. They're not getting the recognition amongst their peers because nobody knows what market research is. We've come across people who lie about what they do, their job title, because they tell friends they're market researchers. They don't have real credibility. So recognition externally and also recognition internally. As I've already mentioned, there are a lot of very small research agencies out there. They don't have HR teams. A lot of the senior people running them are market researchers. They're not necessarily trained managers. So that also is an issue, and I think if we did more to just support, recognise, encourage younger researchers, it would help keep them in the industry.
That's a really interesting point that you bring up there about the recognition, and it's something that when Eliza and I have talked to these research professionals, they've brought up similar kind of themes, perhaps the recognition, but also kind of like the glamour of market research is maybe lacking. So someone drew a comparison between, say, if you're making a movie, everybody knows the director and the actors, but people don't necessarily know the guys that do all the other work beneath it, and that's who we have likened market researchers to. So would you say it's that as well? It's that kind of direct recognition that people aren't getting?
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about, the public perception. The public perception of market researchers is really poor. So people don't feel recognised. And I suppose in a way, if you take that movie analogy, I suspect the runner in the movie says he works in the movie industry. And I think a junior researcher might well say that they work in the advertising industry or the marketing industry, but they probably wouldn't say that they're a market researcher.
And do you think this problem of recognition has that always been the case, Liz, or do you think it is improving with time? Like market researchers are getting a better name and getting their work recognised, or do you think it's been a constant kind of trend?
I think it's been a constant trend. I think talking to young researchers today are just the same as they were when I worked in the industry 30 years ago. Didn't change at all.
I was interested to ask then, who's responsible for this then? If young grads aren't getting enough into market research and there's not enough recognition and kind of people don't know what the researcher does fully, is this a kind of industry side problem, or is this an academic side problem? Should unis be doing more, or should agencies be doing more? I mean, well, I don't want to make a scapegoat, but if we were to point the finger at someone, who should it be?
Well, I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? That nobody really knows, and that's why there isn't anything being done about it. I mean, there are various industry bodies like SMR and the MRS and AQR and BIG, and one could argue that there is possibly more that they could do to raise the profile of market researchers. I think it's partly the fault of market researchers themselves. I think on the whole it tends to attract slightly less extrovert people than other areas in marketing and advertising, and not necessarily people who will go out and shout about their achievements. And I think individual agencies and individuals, the more they could do, that would also help. One could argue that as a recruiter, there are things that I could do, but you know, it's very difficult to get everybody together and have one particular plan.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, you were saying as a recruiter, Liz, there's things you can do. What kind of things is your particular, what are you know, strategies you're putting in place to particularly attract young people? Is there any things that you are doing particularly for that age group? Or?
I have been to the odd university to talk about market research, and I certainly think that is an area where actually both recruiters and individual market researchers, if everybody went back to their old university and did a talk on market research and what is, that would be a great start. So yes, I could certainly do that. I am involved, connected to things like Brand Republic or Only Marketing Jobs, which do blogs on the areas that they are promoting recruiting. There's more that you could possibly do there. But I think to raise it amongst the general public, you've almost got to have a sort of PR, and a single recruiter couldn't do that, because you need things like articles in The Guardian, don't you, on why market research is a career, and I have no idea how you get that sort of thing published.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I kind of always considered that it would be maybe the academic and the uni step first. I mean, I remember when I was at uni, my market research module was really now not representative at all of the market research industry as I see it. You know, and maybe that's part of the problem, that, you know, unis aren't well, actually, for starters, apparently there's only one university in all of Europe that's doing a market research masters, for example. So is that something you see as well? I mean, if a course was available for young people to take, would that help?
It might help, but would they take the course if they don't know about market research in the first place? So if you go to an A-level student and suggest market research as a degree, given they know very little about it, I'm not sure that they would necessarily, you know, decide to follow that. I was at university a long time ago, but I can tell you that what I did in terms of marketing isn't anything like marketing as a job. I don't think it's necessarily, certainly then, it wasn't necessarily just market research, which didn't represent what it was like when you actually got around to doing it. So yeah, I think there is possibly an element of truth in what you say, but I think actually you almost need to start with recognition amongst the general public before you sort of say, okay, it needs to be academics.
Yeah, we were speaking to these professionals yesterday and have, you know, studying market research as a master's. Out of a class of 56, you know, we asked them, these two professionals, what, you know, how many of you are planning to stay in the area of market research and follow this as a career? And only 3 of them put up their hands, you know, which begs the question, even when you do follow a educational background, you have that experience, still you might not want to follow it, you know, people want to go into other areas. So I think that's an interesting point in itself. And one of the girls, you know, you can maybe learn the skills on the job, but would you agree with that, Liz? Do you think, you know, you can learn the skills on the job?
I would agree that you can. Yeah, absolutely. I think you can learn the skills on the job. But going back to what you were saying, I'm really interested why only 3 then want to go into the industry, and I wonder if salary's got something to do with it.
Well, there was an interesting point. I was just going to jump in there and say, after that young student gave us that example, he then kind of afterwards backed that up with, we asked him, were you one of the guys that put your hand up? You know, we kind of asked him the important question, and he said no, he wasn't. But then he kind of said afterwards that the interesting thing was that maybe he does want to go into market research, but maybe the jobs that he's looking for, he just can't find. Like, the titles are wrong almost, you know. So maybe actually what he does want to do is essentially a market research job. However, it's just not titled as market research. So he was kind of saying that, yeah, right, I didn't put my hand up, so I don't want to go into a traditional market research role, but what I do want to do is kind of involved in research in some way, but maybe the industry just doesn't see it as that. So, I mean, I suppose to turn that into a question, is it something to do with the way we title market research? Could we kind of widen the umbrella or kind of segment it almost so that it's maybe a bit more all-encompassing?
I think that's a really valid point. First of all, I think it's a very valid point that market research job titles are really confusing. It's a very diverse industry, and it's a very young industry. We don't have standard job titles. People are called a whole range of things that often don't mean anything to me, even as a recruiter. So I do think that's an issue. And do I also think that we need to think more about the industry more broadly? Absolutely. I mean, that's where the potential is. That's where the future is. The future is going to be in assessing data from a huge variety of sources. It's not just about going out and asking people questions or doing a few groups. And we need to show that diversity. We need to show what an exciting, dynamic industry it is and where the range of opportunities are, not simply, as I say, going in and sending out questionnaires and checking the answers. There's much more to it than that.
And I suppose then that, you know, maybe these new methodologies, as we talked about, that kind of goes hand in hand with that, would you say? So we've got an emergence in mobile research and online research, and this is kind of very much, you'd think, millennial, kind of perfect for millennials, you know, that these guys have grown up with it, you know, so it kind of makes sense, it goes hand in hand. Would you say that the new methodologies could kind of introduce a new wave of young guys?
I think it is. There's no doubt about it that technology has brought in a whole range of new things that are very exciting. Beyond that, we also have data now from web analytics, from CRM, big data. We've got data coming in from all sorts of sources. It's not just customer data. And all of those sources really need to be considered if you're going to see the whole picture. So from the client's point of view, they don't really mind, they just want the answer. And if we just focus on customer data, you're missing out an awful lot of other very useful data sources.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and yes, we don't promote that. We're not shouting about the opportunities for the industry and therefore the individual. We asked Martin Sorrell at the MRS conference if he had his time all over again, would he have chosen to invest in our industry? And he was passionate about why he'd chosen to do it and the opportunities that it offered him at the time as a young man and also offers young people today. But I mean, I thought that was really interesting. It would have been great if somehow that could have been put out to the wider world, because I think people listen to people like Martin Sorrell, whereas for other individuals in the industry, I think it's hard to be heard in the same way.
So maybe we need like an MR spokesman. You know, we did the kind of movie metaphor before. Where's our kind of Leonardo DiCaprio in market research?
MR Superman.
Yeah.
And Superwoman, of course.
I think that is another issue. I think we don't have enough figureheads in the
Role models.
Yeah, role models. So most people can think of people in the movie industry that are role models, but also in marketing and advertising. You can think of people like Charles Selchie, for example, that are very well-known figureheads. But we don't have that in research. That's absolutely right.